It feels like at least once a year, a streaming show will appear seemingly from nowhere and become a phenomenon overnight. This year, that show was Dahmer, and honestly, even having seen it, that still kind of baffles me. I guess the writing should have been on the wall given the ever-increasing popularity of true crime over the last decade, but really, who could have guessed that one of the most popular shows, not just of this year, but of all time on Netflix, would have been a show about Jeffrey Dahmer? Well, Ryan Murphy, that's who. That's right, let's just address the elephant in the room here. This show is spearheaded by Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan, the co-creators of Glee. Ryan Murphy also being one of the co-creators of American Horror Story, the show that I've been infamously harsh toward. In fact, it's basically the only thing this channel is known for at this point. That being said, it has been over a decade since American Horror Story released, and I'd hate to define someone's creative output solely by what they made 10 years ago. All of my negative feelings toward AHS aside, I really wanted to give Dahmer a fair chance and go in with an open mind. The names attached did have me somewhat hesitant, but after the overwhelming success of the show, plus the divisive critical reception, I really felt like I had to see what the show was all about. Does Dahmer deserve its success? And did the creative voices behind the show grow at all in the past decade? Well, yes and no.
Anyway, let's listen.
Ryan Murphy, that's who. Their shows, not just really. Who could have guessed that one of the most popular shows, not just of this year, but of all time on Netflix, would have been a show about Jeffrey Dahmer? Well, Ryan Murphy, that's who. That's right, let's just address the elephant in the room here. This show is spearheaded by Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan, the co-creators of Glee. Ryan Murphy also being one of the co-creators of American Horror Story, the show that I've been infamously harsh toward. In fact, it's basically the only thing this channel is known for at this point. That being said, it has been over a decade since American Horror Story released, and I'd hate to define someone's creative output solely by what they made 10 years ago. All of my negative feelings toward AHS aside, I really wanted to give Dahmer a fair chance and go in with an open mind. The names attached did have me somewhat hesitant, but after the overwhelming success of the show, plus the divisive critical reception, I really felt like I had to see what the show was all about. Does Dahmer deserve its success? And did the creative voices behind the show grow at all in the past decade? Well, yes and no. I have to admit, watching this right after rewatching American Horror Story Asylum was like a breath of fresh air. Apart from a few key scenes, this series was surprisingly restrained. The show is not as fixated on shock value as I expected going in, at least not when it comes to the portrayals of the more grisly stuff that occurred. Really, for a show about Jeffrey Dahmer, it's shockingly light on gore and on-screen violence. The horrifying acts that occur are more often implied than shown, and I think those scenes are more effective because of that. I really enjoyed how methodically paced and tonally consistent this series was compared to the usual baroque and gratuitous style that Ryan Murphy employs in work he's involved in. All without losing a lot of the things I did enjoy about his previous work, like the cinematography, great performances, not just from Evan Peters, from literally everyone, and also the transgressiveness of the material and its socio-political commentary. I think the more subdued approach shows that, on some level, everyone involved had some semblance of respect for the events that took place, and were at least mindful about how to portray them in terms of gratuity. Overall, I would say this is probably the best work I've ever seen from this creative team. And now comes the part that's probably going to make people mad at me. So before I say anything, just know that 1, there will be spoilers for Dahmer, if you can even call them that. Plus, I'm going to give a very fair content warning. We're going to be talking lightly about some very heavy subject matter, so look on screen. If any of the following topics put you at risk of harm, please click away from the video now. And
All right,
lastly,
ladies and
this is
gentlemen.
just my perspective on things. I'm not trying to speak for anyone else
Don't
or
get your
come to
panties
anyone's
in a
defense
bunch,
or attack anybody.
'cause
I'm
mine
not
aren't.
trying to give a definitive take
I'm
on
being
the
watched
show.
by
I'm
I
just
don't know how
sharing
many
my
people,
own
aren't I?
personal feelings on
Aren't
it.
I?
And
If you got hurt, I
unfortunately,
would probably
I feel this
slaughter
series
everyone
also
around me,
embodies the
right?
worst
Yes,
aspect
I
of
would.
American Horror
Yes, I
Story, and
would.
that's being exploitative. If there was one thing in AHS I was most negatively critical of, that was the show constantly using one-to-one recreations of real-world violence right alongside horror tropes to scare and entertain its audience. And while I think it'd be a gross oversimplification to say that's exactly what Dahmer does, it still feels that way a lot of the time, just with a slightly different execution. Being a true crime show, the entirety of the show is predicated on adopting filmmaking techniques from character studies, dramas, and horror films to tell a real-world story. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently incorrect with this in my eyes. It's not as blunt and tasteless to me as putting spooky monsters and the horrors of World War II side by side and treating them as exactly the same thing. But it does present interesting, creative, and ethical challenges. A lot of times in great fictional stories, what happens is the story itself displays a tiny aspect of reality, and through the lens of fiction, makes it feel larger and pulls it more clearly into focus, refracting reality back to us in a way that makes it feel more truly understood. What Dahmer and other reality-based entertainment attempts to do is take big picture reality and inversely uses fiction to try and compress that reality into its narrow lens. In both cases, you're left with similar results. Both are distortions of reality. The difference is in their approach, where one feels enhancing and the other feels inherently reductive. I feel like the goal that's trying to be reached in this reductive approach is to tell the story in a way that can be intuitively and emotionally understood by the audience without reducing it down to the point where it excludes important details or doesn't feel like it's truly telling the full story, even though it never really could. Dahmer as a show really struggles with this balance, and it's clearly something that was weighing on everyone's minds behind the scenes.
I wanted to make sure that we, as viewers, got to truly sort of understand how a situation like this takes place, not just through Jeffrey Dahmer's eyes, but through the eyes of people who had their own hopes and aspirations and dreams.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown to tell this story. That comes with a lot of responsibility because you want to make sure you get it right.
It felt important to be respectful to the victims, to try to tell the story as authentically as we could. We had one rule going into this from Ryan, that it would never be told from Dahmer's point of view.
To be fair to everyone creatively involved, I don't envy them. That is a hard line to ride, and everyone is bound to walk away with wildly different interpretations. For me, they made a few missteps that soured the entire experience for me. I feel like if Ryan Murphy's one rule for the show was truly what Evan Peters says it was, then they didn't do a very good job sticking to it in the first half. Now, this isn't always the case, but as audience members, we are sort of trained to rely on a central character to be our perspective throughout a show or movie, and what character becomes centric to the story is really important in works like Dahmer. This is something that David Fincher's true crime projects like Zodiac and Mindhunter have always been great at. The Zodiac killer is not the central character of Zodiac. The film is centered around an ensemble of journalists at the San Francisco Chronicle. Mindhunter isn't a show centered around Ed Kemper or Charles Manson. It is a story involving them told through the perspective of an ensemble of FBI agents. And when it comes to writing your central character, at least in fiction, a piece of advice you'll always hear is make your most interesting character your central character. The writers of Zodiac and Mindhunter found clear ways to make their respective central characters compelling, mostly because they're very well defined and nuanced, but also due to the fact that what drives these characters is the same thing that compelled us to watch them. The characters, like us, have that natural curiosity a lot of us seem to have about trying to understand these outlandish and heinous crimes. But with all that in mind, just looking at the events that inspired Dahmer from
Also, these RimWorld simulations are testing my way of running a planet or moon base. Hopefully on a terraformed moon one day. Whether I'm a machine or dead or put in stasis or whatever, I don't know. The future is now, and I must prepare for it.
From a writer's perspective, which of these characters sounds more interesting? A completely normal person who's just trying to live their life and tragically dies young, or a cannibalistic serial killer who gets away with his crimes for nearly an entire decade? The show recognizes this and tries to have its cake and eat it too. It focuses on Jeffrey Dahmer for over half of the series because he's an interesting character. A very interesting, literal, real-life murderer. That means taking over half the focus of the show away from the other characters, aka the very real people he killed, their families, and the community who was impacted as a result. The show later switches perspectives somewhat in the second half, focusing more on victims and the community, but it creates this really jarring feeling since the show can't seem to find the right balance of perspectives. It can't highlight one point of view without diminishing the other. Like, imagine being Tracy Edwards right now. Like, you escape being murdered just to be reduced to an audience surrogate in a creepy horror sequence. You don't learn anything about him, how he feels, his dreams, his experiences. All you know is that he's smart and resourceful, that he narrowly escapes Dahmer and is responsible for Dahmer being arrested for his crimes. Do you see how, in this scenario, his character basically only serves Dahmer's story? That's why trying to squeeze reality into the confines of fictional storytelling structure can feel so reductive, especially, like I said, when the first half of the series is dominated by Dahmer's perspective. When it comes to how the show handles Dahmer himself, it feels humanizing at best, fetishistic at worst, and mythologizing somewhere in between. The first 5 episodes spend so much time insisting the significance of past events in Dahmer's life, in so much as showing how his every methodology and motivation is traced back to his past in some way, to the point where it feels like a comic book villain origin story. In fact, this entire first half essentially feels exactly like Todd Phillips' Joker.
No. Ma, estoy bien, ¿ok? Aquí nomás estoy estudiando. ¿Qué hay para comer? I guess I gotta fix this. Ok. Un poquito, ¿ok? A las 8. Yo sé.
Joker. I mean, come on, am I wrong? A misunderstood, mentally ill man who doesn't have proper societal or parental support, who fantasizes about finding love, who then commits heinous acts of violence. Which comes with a lot of the positives of a piece like Joker, like challenging the audience to understand the man himself, and more importantly, the factors that led to creating him and how that reflects the world around us today. But it also comes with a lot of the negatives, like the blunt and overly simplistic ways in which the information is presented, where it feels like there's no room for audience interpretation at all. Dahmer takes a lot of artistic liberties and visually embellishes a lot of his story, which feels ham-fisted in the same way Joker does to me. It's almost like it's insisting you kind of feel bad for the guy. What else is showing all this traumatic stuff that happened to Jeffrey Dahmer supposed to garner out of the audience other than sympathy, or at least understanding. Again, I respect it in the sense that it is a challenge to the audience to humanize this person we've all deified as a quote-unquote monster, as the title aptly says. There's a lot of important dialogue to dissect from the first half of the show. How systemic issues like poverty, racism, and homophobia played a role in Dahmer's crimes going ignored. How societal standards of performed masculinity may have led both to Dahmer feeling victimized as well as his father not being fully emotionally equipped to provide proper support and vulnerability for his son who desperately needed it, which is encapsulated by a wonderfully performed, well-written, and emotionally evocative diner scene. Also, it does attempt to highlight how Dahmer is an anomaly not because he's this evil deity, but because he doesn't fit into a predetermined, neatly defined societal box. We as a society did not know what to do with a Jeffrey Dahmer, and we still wouldn't. In its best moments, this show is humanizing and explorative of Dahmer without feeling like an endorsement of him. But it's all so hard to defend when the entire execution just feels so intuitively wrong to me, since we're talking about a real human being who did the things that he did. All the artistic embellishments and the operatic, poetic tone that often gets employed ultimately only really seems to deify Dahmer in the same way he has been for decades. It sort of feels like the show is just shooting itself in the foot and undoing all of the goodwill it builds up. It feels reductive of the story surrounding Dahmer, especially in regards to the victims. Jeffrey Dahmer's life was a case study, not a character study. If anyone could truly understand Jeffrey Dahmer's point of view, they'd become him. It's honestly a waste of time to even attempt that. The show itself comes to the same conclusion, but we'll get to that later. All that to say, I found the show at its best, not when it is using the victims as a tool to tell Dahmer's story, but using Dahmer as a tool to tell the victims' stories. As I mentioned previously, the second half of the series shifts focus away from Dahmer's perspective and onto the perspective of those impacted by him. In fact, this change in focus comes in the form of an emotional punch to the gut with episode 6, Silenced. This is easily my favorite episode of the entire series, and it seems I'm not alone in feeling that way. Incidentally, I ended up watching this episode twice, once alone and again with someone else, and both times it got a pretty visceral reaction from me. I think I can illustrate the real strength of this episode just from this simple observation. When I was watching it, I was so invested in Tony Hughes and felt so immersed in his perspective that for a moment, I completely forgot I was watching a show about Jeffrey Dahmer, and once I remembered where this story was headed, I felt damn near sick to my stomach. When I watched it again with another person, I could tell they were also becoming invested as the story progressed, and as soon as the poster showed up that said, "Photographers seeking models," they said out loud, "Oh no, that is how this story would end, isn't it?" The inevitability of Tony Hughes' death is used as a depressing reminder that this really happened, as opposed to it being used purely for drama or suspense. Tony is portrayed as a human being with dreams and ambition, as opposed to being used only as a tool to service Dahmer's story. The story is centered first and foremost around Tony and how that beautiful story was cut tragically short because of Dahmer. Also, side note, the board game scene is one of the best written parts of the entire show. It tells you everything you need to know about Tony and Dahmer as characters, their intentions, their feelings, and their relationship in one brilliant scene. However, this episode still comes with its own set of caveats. For one, there are conflicting stories about how long Tony Hughes and Dahmer actually knew each other and how close their relationship actually was. As far as I can tell, unless the people creatively involved with the show had information not accessible to the public, every conversation in this episode is fictionalized, including the entire board game scene I just praised. Which means they also fabricated the idea that Dahmer was being rehabilitated by his relationship with Hughes, that he stopped drinking and killing people because he finally had someone in his life who loved him.
I promise, things are turning around for me. New friend in my life.
Yeah.
Gosh. happy.
Even if Dahmer did know Tony Hughes for an entire year, as a witness report suggests, he killed 6 people in that time. On top of all of this, Tony Hughes' mother, Shirley Hughes, has spoken out against the Dahmer series, both in principle and in execution. I obviously can't and wouldn't want to negate her experience purely based on my own experience. All I can say is that while I found a lot of the characterization of Tony just as condensed, transparent, and somewhat ham-fisted as a lot of the stuff centered around Dahmer, and while it's clearly taking just as many artistic liberties and is also basically just as exploitative, at the very least, it all feels in service of a story worth telling, and it tells that story with a mostly consistent perspective. It's honestly a refreshing change of pace, not just for this show, but for the true crime genre in general. I really wish this was the focus of the entire show. I wish these were the stories we were telling all of the time. If we absolutely have to reduce reality to genre, and there's no way to stop ourselves from doing that or getting past the inherent constraints of that approach, then I'd personally prefer we do it like this. From episode 7 onward, things just kind of continually get muddled for me as the show bounces from perspective to perspective. Again, the stories of Dahmer's family, the neighbors, and the community are all important stories that are more than worth telling, but it still leads to feeling disjointed because Dahmer gets his own dedicated first half of the show, and the second half just sporadically picks and chooses who it wants to.
I'm gonna have to go through all my recordings before that survived, basically. Yeah. Anyway, in the world I'd be building, I'd be testing the humans to be able to, like, this is basically I have no mouth and I must beep situation, and I'm the machine testing them. So I'm basically God in the Unifor universe. So let's begin. Their thoughts are basically mine, but split up. We're in the perfect spot, actually. Also, if I am to be killed, this is gonna be my tomb. Because with what I'm gonna do to my body, it'll need to be quarantined in here. In this apartment, actually, and left alone. While you figure out a way to stop the cancer that's literally growing inside me now.
Push it back down with a new habit. If not for am I fall, am I stumble? Whoa, try to make friends with my pain, cause my pain keeps me humble. Whoa, breathe, slow and release. Let the air expand your lungs. Let your body bring you peace to the sea. To the sea I will speak, down my troubles to the waves as they wash my soul clean. Won't you purge me, here as I stand. Down in the gallows my darkness will hang. Hurt me, and I will not flinch. Firm in my ground, I will not move an inch.
As I walk through this life, I might fall, I might stumble. Whoa, I try to make friends with my pain, cause my pain, it keeps me humble. Whoa, when I wake up in the morning, sometimes I feel so blue, like a guitar with a broken string that can't hold the tune. Cause there are some real bricks around me, busting my balloon. And I really need some healing, cause I find out the breathing and I'm breathing all my feelings to you. Because I'm so down, but like a roundabout, I'm about to turn it back around. Flip it like a kick, flip a switch, I'll flip my mood.
A year ago, I started a project.
As I walk through this life, I might fall, I might stumble. Whoa, I try to make friends with my pain, cause my pain, it keeps me humble. Whoa, humble, try not to outgrow these boots. Sometimes I stumble, try to stay firm in my roots.
A year ago, I started a project. I started a project with no name. Now, I choose to name it Fearless.
Closure on this roller coaster. I'm a poster child bipolar, loner with the smoking motor, soldier with the broken holster. Focus, don't go down in smoke, then choke on coke and overdose. Just stand your ground, stay humble, proud and lucky like a four-leaf clover. It's a walk, am I fall, am I fall, am I fall. Try to make friends with my pain, with my pain, with my pain. As I walk through this life, I'm a fall,
Okay.
I'm a stumble.
First log written.
Try to make friends with my pain, 'cause my pain keeps me humble. Boy.
Let's continue. I also seem to have a anomalous effect on people. Some people can hear my thoughts. I'm not joking about that, and that should be looked into by the government if they are watching. Do not test on anyone that I have effect on. I will find out eventually. And your DNA will get what it deserves, naturally.
Hi there, man. It's been a little while. Did you miss me? You thought you buried me, didn't you? Risky. Cause I always come back.
Because
Deep
at
down,
this
you know
point,
that. Deep down, you know, I'm always
you
the
and I are
periphery.
the same.
Man, on your pleased to see me. It's been weeks since we spoke, bro. I know you need me. You're the sheep,
like
I'm the shepherd.
Dahmer?
Not your place to lead me.
You
Not your
like
place
me?
to be biting off the hand that feeds me. Hi, Bren. I've been taking some time to be
So,
distant. I've been taking some time to be still. I've been taking some time to be by myself since my therapist
study
told me
me
I'm
as
ill.
well.
And I've been making some progress lately, and I've learned some new coping skills. So I haven't really needed you much, man. I think we need to just step back and chill. Bren, you sound more insane than I do. You think that those doctors are really there to guide you? Been through this a million times. Your civilian mind is so perfect at always being lied to. Okay, take another pill, boy. Drown yourself in the sound of white noise. Follow this 10-step program, rejoice. All your problems will be gone. Fucking dumb boy. Nah, mate. This time is different, man, trust me. I feel like things might be falling in place. And my music's been kinda doing bits too. Like I actually might do something great. And when I'm gone, maybe I'll be remembered for doing something special with myself. That's why I don't think that we should talk, man. Cause when you're with me, it never seems to help.
You think that you can amputate me? I am you, you are me, you are I am we are one. Split in two, that makes one, so you see. You gotta kill you if you wanna kill me. I'm not leftover dinner, I'm not scraps on the side. Oh, your music is thriving, delusional guy. Where's your top 10 hit? Where's your interview with Oprah? Wow, your Grammys ran nowhere.
Yeah, but my music's not commercial like that. I never chase numbers, statistics or stats. I never write hooks for the radio, they never even play me, so why would I concern myself with that? But my music is really connecting, and the people who find it respect it. And for me that's enough, cause this life's been tough, so it gives me a purpose I can rest in.
Man, you sound so pretentious. Ran, your music is so self-centered. No one wants to hear another song about how much you hate yourself. Trust me. You should be so lucky, having me inside you to guide you, remind you to manage expectations, provide you perspective. That thing you neglected, I get it. You wanna be a big deal, next Jimi Hendrix, forget it.
Man, it's not like that.
Man, it's just like that, I'm inside you, you twat.
No, it's not, man, you're wrong. When I write, I belong.
Let me break the fourth wall by acknowledging this song. Ren sits down, has a stroke of genius. He wants to write a song that was not done previous. A battle with the subconscious, Eminem did it.
Played on guitar.
Plan B did it.
Man, you're not original, you criminal rip-off artist. The pinnacle of your success is stealing other people's material.
Ren, mate, we've heard it all before. She sells seashells on the seashore.
Fuck you, I don't need you, I don't need to hear this. Cause I'm fine by myself, I'm a genius. And I will be great, and I will make waves, and I'll shake up the whole world beneath us.
That's right, speak your truth, your fucking god complex leaks out of you. It's refreshing to ask for you, say it instead of downplay it.
Music is all about the creative process, and if people can find something to relate to within that, then that's just a bonus.
Fuck you, I'ma fucking kill you, Ren.
Well, fucking kill me then, let's fucking have you, Ren.
I hope for government cooperation with me. I have no want for violence between countries, and I have no want for war. You've gone to war against drugs. Do not go to war against a single entity.
Father of lies, Mephistophelies, truth in a blender, deceitful pretender, the banished avenger, the righteous surrender when standing in front of my soul of a cliff.
To focus on. There's a lot of valuable insight and commentary in these episodes, showing how the victims struggle to process their grief, showing them testifying in court, showing Dahmer's father's struggle with his own place in creating his son.
I have schizoaffective disorder. May I remind you? That's the only warning I'm gonna have to give.
The community activism and their demands for justice, etc. All of it is captivating and contemplative, and again, feel like stories worth telling. Yet
This will be a cold, calculated look at myself, so if you want to accompany me with that, you are free to do so. Otherwise, feel free to enjoy the show. You can call me Matthew.
Yet it still can't help but feel misguided in a lot of ways. Especially in episode 9, which was almost maddening to watch because it's clearly making meta-commentary on exploitative pieces of media about Dahmer, highlighting how he's been mythologized by media and how f***ed up it is that victims are constantly being re-traumatized by reminders from biographies or comic books or quote-unquote fans of Jeffrey Dahmer. And it's like, motherfuckers, is that not exactly what we are watching right now?
It's like they're making him into a superhero. Jeff Dahmer isn't a superhero.
You turned Dahmer into the Joker, for Christ's sakes.
This is not some Halloween story.
Says the show that conveniently dropped 9 days before the start of October. Come on now. I know that you said you tried to reach out to like 20 different families and got no response, but how did you think these real people you're portraying were going to feel seeing Dahmer's face plastered all over the homepage of Netflix and seeing it break streaming record after streaming record? Probably the same way they felt getting copies of unauthorized biographies to sign and seeing people take pictures in front of the apartments, just as you've depicted. I'm not trying to come out here and be offended on anyone's behalf, but it is clear in hindsight, given everything that the victims' loved ones have said themselves, that this series did not land the way they intended it to, and this episode sticks out like a sore thumb because of it. And then the series is capped off by an ending that feels completely non-conclusive. The series seems to concede that trying to understand what Jeffrey Dahmer did and what made him do it is a fruitless endeavor, that it is a better idea to just honor the victims and allow their families and the community to heal.
There's a temptation to try to know and know definitively why someone like Jeffrey Dahmer is what he is. There are no easy answers when it comes to someone like him. You'll never know why he did what he did. I believe it would be beneficial to the public and all concerned that there be closure and that this matter is resolved once and for all and we move on.
Which just begs the question, what was the point of any of this? Why was this made? Who is it even for? Who wanted this? Was it made for us, the audience, for our entertainment? Because if so, that's kind of sleazy and gross, to put it politely. Was it made for the victims? Because that kind of blew up in everyone's face. Was it made to make us contemplate the broader socio-political implications of these events? If so, was a lot of the first half and the sometimes overly dramatized approach even necessary? What approach would be the best approach when it comes to real events like this? Is there any way to make a series like this without being inherently exploitative? Where do we draw the line? Is Schindler's List exploitative? Michelle Haneke seems to think so.
Aus dem Grund, weil man bestimmte Dinge, ich finde auch, setze ich mich vielleicht hier in die Nesseln, ich finde einen Film wie ein Spielberg-Film über das Konzentrationslager auch, sobald ein solches Thema zur Unterhaltung wird, ist es von vornherein meiner Meinung nach schon indiskutabel.
Do you agree, John?
I remember reading a book called Prisoner B3087. It scarred me so much so that I remember saying to myself, no, not a single day in my life will I experience pain like he did. Never in my life will I experience something as horrible as he did. And that has kept me going past so much pain, unimaginable pain. After having lost my identity, I feel as though I'm gaining some